Jamshidi. I am your host for this morning's session, so please sit back and enjoy Meren's talk. Over the past 20 years, Meren has worked on projects in information technology, business transformation, re-engineering, and intelligent transport systems. When Meren immigrated from Iran and got his first job in Canada, he was asked by his manager to provide a list of outstanding tasks. Since the only meaning of the word he knew for outstanding was perfect, awesome, fantastic, he provided a list of those tasks that he thought were outstanding, awesome, fantastic. Meren learned on the spot that there was another meaning of the word outstanding that meant incomplete, leftover, and unfinished. Meren, needless to say, is now familiar with English homonyms. Today, Meren is president and CEO of Epicent Academy, a project management consulting firm and PMI training company. Also, a bronze sponsor at this conference. Please join me in welcoming Meren Jamshidi.
Welcome everyone to this session, and hope we're going to have another fantastic session, outstanding one way. And the story that my host just told you is not about 20 years ago, it's just about September 2015. That like, weird situation that happened to me. I was working for Ledcor on a Falcon project for Thales. Yeah, that was a true story. I was asked to provide them with the list of outstanding fiber drops, and I provided them the list of all done, perfectly signed off, and everything. But I didn't know that there was a risk over there that I had not been able to identify by that time. Okay, so today's session is all about risk management. That's my favorite topic when it comes to project management, in addition to stakeholder management and communication. So these are my three babies when I want to speak or teach about project management. You all are aware that even if you have the best scope defined ever, even if you have the best structured schedule for your projects, and you do have everything in place, even more than enough budget, but you have not been proactive in terms of identifying your project risks, and also in terms of putting a structure in place to identify, to analyze, and to appropriately respond or plan to respond to the risks, your project might be a failure at the end. Today, and over this session, we're going to walk you through the whole project risk management process. But I'm going to provide you with a fantastic example, and that's something that you're now experiencing at this conference. We're going to talk about the risks that you might have been able to identify if you were Cindy or Carmen in managing this conference. And then we're going to go through the processes of quantitatively analyzing the risks, and also the risk quantitative analysis. And finally, we're going to see what we could do if we were them. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Is it good? Okay, awesome. So when it comes to project risk management, and I need to test this. I didn't do a good risk management. I needed to test this first, and it's not working. I don't know why, but I can actually just go with this one. So, I know. There we go. So as you all know, risk is something which is actually uncertain in your project environment. Risk is something that you can anticipate for the future of your project. It's a challenge that you might face in future, and you can identify from now. So there are two main things about the risks that you need to know to be able to differentiate risks with issues or something else. The first thing is that it's uncertain. You cannot necessarily and confidently say that yes, that's over there. there's a level of uncertainty associated to that. The other thing is that they might happen in the future or not, and they will impact your project. If they happen, they will impact your project objectives. There are some positive risks and negative, as you all know. I'm assuming that you're all either project managers or working in project environments. So these are the basics of risk management. I don't want to go into details of them. But as you know, like the project risks could be positive or negative. So the positive ones are the ones that we call them opportunities, and there are some responses based on project management knowledge area, the risk management knowledge area that you can follow up with, follow the plan, and then provide your team and your project with the structured responses. And there's some negative ones which are the threats, which actually more of the project risks are negative risks that might impact your project. But when we want to categorize or identify risks and draw a line between risks and issues, maybe this slide would help you better, because there are three types of problems that might happen in project environments. One of them are known knowns. Those are the things that you know, or you know that you don't know. So you already know that there is something missing. Like for example, I don't know how to speak French. It's not a risk by itself, because I already know that, right? So it's an issue. So if I want to work in Quebec or in France, then that is an issue that I have. But if there is no necessary requirement to necessarily talk French, then that might be a risk because it's uncertain. There are two other types of problems. One of them is known unknowns. We know that we don't know something. We know that something might happen that we don't know them. But since they're known unknowns, we can identify them. For example, we can identify a risk that if this computer dies today, what am I going to do? So it is known that I don't know if it's going to break or not, if it's going to fail or not. And there's some unknown unknowns, and these are the most dangerous ones. Something happens out of the blue that you have no idea about. You cannot even identify them. It might not be your problem, it might not be your fault or failure, because there are a lot of things that happen in the future that you have not been able to identify, either because you did not have enough visibility or because something has changed during the course of the project environment. The focus of project risk management is mainly on the known unknowns, because those are the ones that you can identify and you can do something for. How can you plan for something that you cannot even identify? During the knowledge area of risk management, there are 7 processes. I'm not advocating this strategy necessarily, but this is one of the best ways to deal with risks. Like any other things in project environments, you need to first plan for what you're going to do. So you need to create some rules and some guidelines and instructions on how to deal with the rest of processes, and that will become your plan. What's the methodology that you're going to use? Do you have a risk register? Do you have any templates? How are you going to report? How often are you going to sit together with your team and do some risk management practices? These are the things that you need to plan for in advance, even before getting into identify risk, which is the next process. Over the identify risk process, we actually need to sit with our team members, with our SMEs who know more than us. Normally, SMEs know more than project managers, and identify any type of risks that might happen in future. There are some guidelines and some best practices on how to do risk management identification. One of them is to go by category. Like for example, as I mentioned, with this conference, you could categorize speakers risk, and then conference or venue risks, food risks, right? Technology risks, registration risks. And when you categorize these and you break them down, just like something with WBS, then you can create another. Sometimes I joke and I say that's another BS. That's RBS. So we have WBS, we have RBS, which is risk breakdown structure. Of course, we do have another RBS, which is called resource breakdown structure. So that RBS, the risk breakdown structure, helps you identify risks in a more structured way, and the chances of missing risks would be less, right? After that, you need to prioritize the risk. What if you've identified like 100 risks? Can you deal with them? Do you have the time, the capacity, the resources, and the will to deal with all those risks? Do you have enough budget to do something for them? Who's going to do the job then? Like if you identify the risk and then just want to deal with the risk, the scope of the work would be left unmanaged. That's why that we need to go through the perform qualitative risk analysis process to prioritize the risks. And there are only two pillars. It forms a risk score, forms the size of your risk. One is probability and the other one is impact. So what is the probability of the risk happening? Is it 90% or is it 10%? And then what is the impact? So now let's say the risk happens, the risk occurred. What is the impact? Is it very high or is it very low? So based on these two, we can identify the score of the risk. And we don't know them until we are engaged in the project. So each project needs to be tailored based on the risk requirements, based on the stakeholder issues and stakeholder appetite and attitudes and all those things. There are some things called, risk threshold, risk appetite, risk exposure. I don't want to go into those detailed terminologies. Those are the part of PMP and RFP proposals. We're just talking more of a practical exercise in risk management. After prioritizing the risk by identifying the risk score, you only need to deal with the high priority risks, right? So you just need to leave those low priority risks on your watch list. You're not going to forget them. You're not going to delete them, right? Because you never know. As things change during the course of your project, those low priority risks might grow. So you need to always watch them, and that's why we call it a watch list. It could be the same document, just by labeling the risks, you can differentiate them from high priority risks. And then you take the high priority risks to another process or another meeting. It could be the same meeting, by the way. Everything is hand in hand. Like this risk identification session and risk analysis session could be the same session that you are going to create your WBS, if any, or you're going to look into the scope of the work. During perform quantitative risk analysis, there is one critical thing that you need to identify, and that is the expected monetary value of your risk, right? And that comes from, again, the numerical value of the probability times the impact of your project. You need to have those information. It's not easy in some cases to numerize the impact that your project might face as a result of a risk. For example, the impact to the brand of your organization, how can you identify that? That's not easy, definitely. But there should be some historical information. There are some documentation review processes or subject matter expertise comments that you can just identify those numbers and then follow through. So once you have the expected monetary value, definitely you can select what to do, and you can consciously choose how to deal with your risks. There's a process called planned risk responses, over which you definitely can see, okay, if it's a negative risk, these are the strategies that we have. Do you need any contingency? Are you going to just accept the risk passively? Are you going to mitigate the risk? I'm going to talk about these in a bit, but that's how risk management in a nutshell happens. And once you have the plan in place, and these processes so far are all under planning, you've not yet started executing, don't take me wrong, you can do that over executing, but if you want to just, look into risk management knowledge area in a traditional way, yes, you need to do planning and then move on to executing where you can implement your risk responses. So you need to have some plans first. So when something happens in future, then you have a plan. You can refer to your manual and document to see what is the best course of action based on your previous investigation and previous, due diligence. But monitoring and controlling is another process which allows you to always and iteratively look into your risks and look into your project. You need to put risk management on the agenda of your project progress review. It should be timely. You need to pay enough attention to your project risks. Again, because it's not that like you have identified the risks, that's done, you just need to implement your project, there are no risks happening or no risks are going to be identified in future. Again, I'm emphasizing on this because during my speech yesterday, I talked about the fact that Agile and Waterfall have been misunderstood in some cases. That Waterfall is just silos of process groups. When we do planning, it's done, we write it on stone. No, the plan is a live document. Whenever we learn more, whenever we identify more things, whenever we progressively elaborate our plan, we can go back and update our plan. So that's the reason that I emphasize on this. Three roles, or let's say attitudes towards risk management. Some people are risk seekers. They're so keen in terms of identifying risks. Some are risk neutral. They really don't pay attention. Maybe that's because of their role or their position in the organization. And there are some people who are risk averse. Then you need to be careful about all of these. It's not something that is very clear. They do not have any labels or titles that this person is risk averse. It's just like personality types, right? Some people are more dominant than the others. Some are more influencing. You need to get to know that. Interviews, questionnaires, talking to people. There are many different ways that you can identify these type of attitudes, which are super critical in being able to manage your team. That's mainly because you need to deal with every and each person differently. People are not machines. If you press Control F on this computer, you can press Control F on any other computer and receive the same response. But that is not true for people. If you deal with a risk seeker, you need to adapt your behavior. But remember, the keynote speaker also was talking about adaptability, right? So adaptability is not only in the leadership phase. For your tactical level, dealing with every and each person, you need to adapt your behavior because at the end of the day, you need to deal with every and each person the way they want to be dealt with. It's not that you have just one way of doing the things and then one size fits all. That's not true. Okay, so what information are you going to identify and add to your risk management plan? As you know, risk management plan is the main output of the first process in risk management. The process is plan risk management, the output is risk management plan. These are, as a minimum, the information that you need to have on your risk management plan. What is the methodology? How are you going to do that? Do you have any funding for that? What is the timing? What is the reporting system? What is your tracking method? The timelines, the cadence, who is in charge of risk management as a whole? If you have a centralized risk management team versus a decentralized risk management, everything should be clarified here. Even more, like when it comes to identify risks or identify anything, like when it comes to collect requirements or data gathering, what is the best approach? Like I'm going to name a couple. We can go with interviews, right? We can interview with people, and that's how we can collect information. We can send questionnaires, or the other name for that is Delphi or Delphi technique, right? Just like surveys, anonymous surveys. Or you can just go and look into the documentation reviews or historical information. Or you can brainstorm with people, right? There are many, I think there are 12 or 15 different ways that you can collect requirements. How should we deal with risk management, with identify risks when we go into that process? Do you have any thoughts, guys? Which one would be the right data collection technique when we want to get together as a team and identify the risks?
Past experience.
What's that?
Past experiences.
Past experiences? Well, that's a very good one. Yes?
Brainstorming.
Brainstorming is awesome. I love it.
Lesson learned.
Lessons learned is a perfect one.
Workshop.
Workshop is another perfect one, but just think about it. What if you guys, those 4 people who answered my question are my team, and then we are now in identify risk session, and every and each person has their own thoughts. What should I do? For that reason, that should have been planned in advance. we should have been decided, like that should have been documented in your risk management plan. We're not going to argue about this. We're not going to disagree with each other when we want to really identify risks. Did you get the point? So during planned risk management, we need to talk about this, not during identify risks. And that should be documented, agreed on, and everyone now knows that there is a plan in place. When we get into identify risks, then if I ask someone, hey guys, what tools and techniques are we going to use to collect the information? The answer either is this tool, or let's take a look at our plan. We have talked about it. It's there. There is a manual. There is some sets of instructions. We already have discussed that, right? So this is the whole reason for planning, and it could be applicable to any other planning documents in project management. Same thing for scope management. The first process after plan scope management is collect requirements. Even for that, you should have planned in advance. For quality management, for whatever knowledge area in project management, you need to have a plan set in place. That's a good thing. That's good. Because if you learn something in future, you're more than welcome to go back and update your plan and then let your people and your team members and your stakeholders, those who need to know about this change. So these are the items that you need to add to your risk management plan. What is the definition of probability? What is the definition of impact? What is the level of probability and impact that your organization is okay to accept? I teach at BCIT. I sometimes see a sign on some of the corridors and hallways that it says BCIT is a zero tolerant organization in terms of abusement. That means that it's zero. Even if the risk is of low priority and low impact, that's not acceptable. But how about your projects? Are you okay to accept the risks that are of low priority and low impact? I would say yes. In many cases, a risk that is like, a risk that comes from a priority of like just 5%, there is only 5% chance of that risk happening. And even if it happens, there is very low impact. So in some situations, it's not acceptable at all. But in many organizations, many teams, especially those who are in smaller projects, you don't deal with government or some of like those daily projects that we work on. We can accept them. But again, we're not going to argue with our teams when we want to rank the teams and when we work on perform qualitative risk analysis. The level of the risks that are acceptable versus those that needs to be dealt with should be clarified, and that is what we call the risk threshold. There is that line that over which we cannot tolerate the risks. Plan risk management is where to go and look for those information. The next process is identify risks. As I mentioned, you need to get together with your team. There are a lot of information that you need to have to be able to identify the risks. Again, I don't want to talk PMP or RMP, but just to let you know, identify risks is one of those processes that has the most number, or the higher number, or highest number of inputs when you want to do identify risks. Because you need to know many different things. You need to know about your procurement. You need to know about your quality metrics. You need to know about your human resources or even other resources that you have. You need to have your project management plan, whatever you have on it, to be able to finally look into the risks that you might face in future. There are a lot of processes that you only have 1 or 2 inputs, but for this one, the most number of inputs are going to be here. So again, the reason that we want to identify risks is that we don't want to face something in future that we do not have any plans for it. If you need to put aside some budget, if you need to have a plan in our back pocket, just in case something happens, we need to work on it in advance. We do not have enough time to work on risks when they happen. However, again, if it's unknown unknowns and they happen, definitely you need to do something, and that's what we call it workaround versus a structured, planned response for any identified risks. So, the main output of identified risk log, like by definition, it's a risk register. And at a minimum, your risk register should include these items. What is the risk description? Who has raised that risk? Which team member has raised that risk? And also, what are the potential responses that you can identify or you can think of right now? You don't need to dig into different methodologies or ways and quantitative and qualitative risk analysis. We're talking about identify risks. Let's say you're just thinking and brainstorming and you say, okay, you know what, there is a risk of something happening. What is your immediate reaction if that risk had happened now? What would be your potential response? These are the minimum things that you need to add. Well, you're more than welcome to add some, unique identifiers to identify the risks, and then, categorization. So, is it a technical risk that you've identified? Is it a human resource risk? Is it as I mentioned for this program, for this conference, is it a venue and catering risk? Is it a risk regarding food or allergy stuff? You can categorize them as well, and you can assign someone as the risk owner, as the responsible person. So just don't forget, if you identify risks for your organization, the risk owner, and there are three different titles or people or roles that you can add to each risk. One is the person who raised that risk. The other one is the person who is responsible or owner of that risk. And they might not necessarily be the same. A team member might raise a risk that person is not in charge of dealing with that. You've just brainstormed and someone has said something and that's okay, but the other person, the person in charge would be someone else. And then at the end, the project manager is the overall accountable for the project environment and whatever happens in your project environment. While you might have a risk management specialist or a risk management professional, but again, the poor project manager, we'll say that, is accountable for whatever happens in your project, in the project environment. And it's better as a best practice to have a structured way of defining and wording your risks. For example, this is one of them. You can say, because of whatever, risk might occur, which would lead us to something. So that gives us the causality behind the risk, and also the impact that the risk might impose to the project, and also the risk. What is that? You can divide this into three different things. You can add one more column to your risk register to add those because of. So that is actually the trigger or the root cause of that risk. But this is a good way of doing that. If you don't want to go that way, you can just go with risk might occur, which would lead us to whatever. That is the format. So it's better for consistency, but you don't necessarily have to. There is no mandate to do this. You all should have one copy of an Excel document on your tables. Do you all have one? If not, let me know, and there should be some more. You might be able to divide that. So what I want to do now, first of all, I'm going to pause for a sec. It's not a lecture. It's going to be a workshop. It's supposed to be a workshop, so it's going to be interactive. If you have any questions till now, I'm happy to answer. If not, I want to engage you to work as a team. You don't have to work individually because there are a lot of people here. You might not be able to handle all the answers. But any questions for now? Yes, please.
So you mentioned the two main things to have are, hi. So you mentioned the two key things to have is likelihood or probability and impact. What are your thoughts about proximity?
Well, proximity, the main two things, they're urgency, they're proximity, right? So you might identify a risk that is not of high priority based on the priority and impact definitions, but they're so urgent. Definitely, you need to look into that as well. As I mentioned, I don't want to go into details of these, however, then we need to talk about a lot of different things. But yes, proximity is important, urgency is important, and also risks regarding different types of stakeholders with different tolerance levels are important as well. So it's not that in a project environment you can say, okay, you know what, my threshold is this line, anything over that needs to be dealt with, anything below are, acceptable. Even in one single project, risks that are related to one specific stakeholder could have a different threshold compared to other risks. Because if you have, like, for example, if you, one of your stakeholders is your VP of your organization, who is a very dominant person, a very detail-oriented, result-oriented person, you might not be able to like deal with that person in the same way that you deal with other people. But definitely, thank you, Hayden. That is one of the important things. But when we talk about probability and impact, these two are the main pillars that you can play with. That's the key. You can play with to do something to actually mitigate the level of that risk. You cannot manipulate the proximity. You cannot do anything for proximity. But if you want to mitigate a risk, let's say you get a coffee. That's a tangible example that I always use. You go to Starbucks or Tim Hortons or whatever, you get a coffee. There are always risks of burning your hands, right? But this sleeve that has been added to the cup, the sleeve that Starbucks adds to that, is a mitigation technique to decrease the level of probability of your hands getting burned. So they can only work on either probability or impact. They cannot do anything for proximity. That's why these two are very important. Okay, so if there are no other questions, let's practice the risk register. And what I want you guys to do is to, like, for 2 minutes or so, identify 2 or 3 different risks for this conference. Let's assume that you were the team in charge of holding this 2-day conference here. What are the risks that you could identify that might happen in future?
I would be worried if some of the speakers get
Yep. How'd that go? Yep.
But please go as a team. You don't have to feel like holding stickers. Just one
That's what I try to talk to a lot of the too. Is I was like, well, what about this? Like, well, if you don't have document control, wait a minute, that's a chapter in the Enterprise I checked. You're gonna have problems. There's fundamentals of project development and management that if they don't exist, there's no tool out there that's going to fix it. All you can do is show you what the problems are and you try to mitigate them as best you can. That's the reality. No, I don't grab this. You just work as E-Span.
That's right. Yeah. So I was Hayden. Yeah, so we just I think just
one more minute. Just want to be mindful about time here.
anything that we can do to improve I'm on the board. So I wasn't directly on the planning team for the conference, but just collecting feedback.
This is the first time that I've done it for strengths, and I'm not. I wish I could have a practice of solutions tonight. You always get
Okay. Please raise your hand. Whoever can raise your hand, raise your hand out. So we want to stop here. And I'm going to collect some thoughts, maybe one per team. Hopefully we can handle that. And can we have the mic, please, if any representative from each team wants to mention their risks. And you can start from right there, please. Start from there. Are you ready, guys? Do you want to share your risks? Yeah, whoever.
On our corner? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, we came up with a bunch of things. We came up with a bunch. Is that live?
Yes. You are.
We came up with a bunch of things. First of all, are you going to get enough people to register for this?
So I can't hear you. Can you speak a little bit louder? No, it's on, but you just need to speak a little bit louder.
Hello?
Yep.
Okay, so the one is, do you have enough people to register for the conference?
Mhm.
Have you had enough time to book the venues? Do you have enough volunteers coming?
Okay.
Your speakers, good enough.
I just take one.
Okay.
I just wrote down not having enough.
I'll stop now.
Yeah, because we're gonna run out of time. I know you are all experts and you can identify the risks.
Passing the mic.
Perfect, thank you. Next team, please.
Things like earthquake happen.
Good job. I love that. Earthquake. Okay, thank you. So the risk of like some disasters like earthquake happening or tsunami or like.
Yeah, so we came up with the names not being on the list. What should we do?
The names.
Not being on the list for the registration. It
Okay.
happened with me, so that's fine.
So how do they mitigate it?
They wrote it down and gave us a bag, so.
Can I get your name, please? Like the first gentleman who mentioned.
Oh, my name's Andy.
What's that?
Andy?
Andy?
Yeah.
Okay, the person who raised the risk is Andy. And then earthquake?
Abhi?
Abby. And the name's not on the list as a risk.
Gabriel.
Gabriel?
Yeah.
Okay, next team, please.
Having the right connectors. For instance, if there are Mac presenters, there are the connectors that will connect to a
Okay,
laptop.
that's a good one. Technical issues with laptops or computers.
Steven.
Steven. Thank you. The next team.
Clinton, and one of the risks we talked about was people going through the wrong pheromone because there's so many all around here. Watching the video, that was like signs that.
Guys, I wish I had Cindy or Carmen in this room. They need to use your expertise for the next conference. You raise fantastic risks. Okay. Was it Clinton?
Clinton. Yeah.
Clinton. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Vince. We came up with transit issues. People having problems getting down here.
Sorry, can you?
Transit issues.
Transit issue. Okay. Okay. Good. Can you elaborate on that, please? Wait a minute. What do you mean by that?
So yeah, if Cyprian shuts down or there's.
Yeah, because you use transit issues. When we talk about risk management, we need to be careful about the word issue and risk. It's not like, you know what I mean? So if it's a transit issue, my mind immediately goes to, okay, there's an issue with the transit right now, or with the bus services right now. But if you're thinking about a problem that might happen or might not happen in the future, yes, I can take that as a risk. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I would say transportation risks. Thank you. Let's
we thought about medical issue with maybe food poisoning or emergency.
Okay. Can I take like allergy related? Okay. Perfect, thank you.
cancellation at the last minute.
Well, yeah, that's a good one. That's a like terrible risk. Speaker cancellations. Okay, thank you. How many more teams do we have? I think we need to wait here for some part of the lunchtime should be spent with us class.
Hi, my name's Gabriella.
Gabriella.
And since everybody else has taken our entire list of we're going to talk about an opportunity.
Oh wow, that's a good one.
Our opportunity was that because people came to the PMI conference, that more people would register, the word would get out, you have more PMI members, and also more people sign up to do sessions and be speakers at next year's.
Okay, perfect, thank you. That's a good one, Gabriella. Perfect, thank you. Any teams left? Any outstanding teams? You're all outstanding, but I'm looking for any outstanding. See? Had you ever thought about that? That outstanding is two different meanings, like they're completely opposite. They're so outstanding, but I'm looking for the outstanding team.
I'm surprised no one brought up power failure. Like, that would impact almost every aspect of this conference. You wouldn't be able to present, microphones wouldn't work, lights would be out, elevators wouldn't work for lazy people like me. It's only 3 floors, right?
Sure.
But that one would be a pretty big one to have to try and manage around. You have to make a call. Are we going to do this all manually, or are we going to shut down the conference?
Okay.
We had a couple more.
Yep.
One was the Wi-Fi. Is that would affect everybody if they're using their Wi-Fi along with the.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
The Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi what?
Just being down.
Okay, the Wi-Fi being down.
Essentially, you might be using the Wi-Fi. The app being down, or that is not working, and that in these rooms, we're actually running out of space. So the rooms are not large enough.
Perfect. I'm gonna sell these to these guys. I'm not gonna give them for free because some of them might not have been thought about.
Labor dispute.
What's that?
Labor dispute.
Labor disputes. Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's take these and talk about these ones. I'm not sure if we can handle all of them, but some at least. And I know I have talked to Carmen, and I've asked her. I interviewed with her before the session, and I asked her about 3 identified risks. So let's see how they match with our practice here. So now that we have a lot of risks, and if we had time, I'm pretty sure that we could identify more than 200 risks in this session. For sure, you had a lot of ideas. But do we really need to deal with all of them? We can't. Even if we want, we don't have to. We can't. You know, there are a lot of things that we just need to move on because there are of low priority, or you can just do something else. So here is the probability and impact matrix, and based on this, you can prioritize your risks. First of all, this probability and impact matrix should be clarified, agreed on, and documented on your risk management plan. You see these red ones? The red ones are the ones that you cannot tolerate. But for another project, this might come down, or you never know, only these 2 items might be red. So it's all based on the threshold, based on actually the tolerance level of your stakeholders and the complexity and the importance of your project. So you need to play with these to identify which risks need to be dealt with. Over the course of perform qualitative risk analysis, you need to add probability and impact scores, or some rankings. We don't have scores here. We can just go from either 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 for the level of impact and the level of probability, or just go with very low, low, medium, high, very high. So can I ask you to, we're gonna pick some if you don't mind, and we don't have enough time to go over everything. So let's select a couple that I've just identified. Not enough people register for the course. How would you rank this risk based on the probability and impact? And you can see that there is one column for probability, and there is one column for, that's called likelihood and impact. under perform qualitative risk analysis column, you can add the level of probability and the level of impact and see where that risk fits. What do you think? Do you think that not having enough people register for this course is of high priority? If you want to say 1, 3, 5, 9, 5, 5, 7, 9, which one would be the rank for the probability of that risk happening? It's low. It's low because we are the only, with the biggest conference in Western Canada, and we've done that before, and they have done a lot of things in order to ensure that that's not happening. But that's still a risk. Do we need to deal with that? Well, there are a lot of things that have happened before, like advertising, rebranding, PM West conference, talking about it from last year or maybe 10 months ago. So I would say, that's my personal thought, that is not a risk that is not tolerable for me. So we can just accept that risk. Do you agree with that? In some cases, so let's look at it that way. 2 months to the conference, we need to look into the number of registrants. If it's still low, then that is something that might be riskier than 6 months ago. So it depends on the timing. So if 6 months ago, Cindy has looked into the registration list and we only have 10 people, she shouldn't freak out, right? Because people are normally registering at the last moment. They wait until the last moment of the early bird or whatever and they register. Yes?
You can say that you have some mitigation strategies. Like for instance, as you said, the early marketing, right?
Yeah.
Or the fact that you offer a discount for early registration. So
Exactly. Yeah. Again, what I mentioned was could be interpreted as a mitigation technique to kind of ensure that risk's probability is becoming even lower. But the impact is huge. If we do not have enough registrants, the impact would be high. So again, depending on when we are doing this risk analysis thing, if it's 15 days to the conference or 10 months to the conference, our strategy might be different. Another risk was earthquakes. Well, I'm not sure if they've done anything, like if they've thought about it or not, but do you really identify earthquake as a risk in your projects and do something for it? Or is it just based on insurance?
Based on insurance.
Insurance, right? So you transfer the risk. What can you do? Well, let's say that the probability is low, which is low, based on the historical information, but the impact is, you know what the impact looks like, right? But can you do anything? The only thing that you can do is, you can't set aside money for that. You can't, add contingency to your project. But you can transfer it, the risk and the ownership and all the consequences to the shoulder of a third party, that's insurance companies, and then you need to pay for it. So when you transfer risks, you need to pay for the premium. That is one thing that you need to think about when you're planning for your risk management. And that is something that needs to be done during planned risk responses, so we're going to talk about it a little bit. The other one is the right connectors. We might not have the right connectors. I think that could be also transferred. We know that we have tech people here, and everything is being outsourced to the conference venue, to the Fairmont Hotel. And they have been told, I'm assuming, I'm not sure. Again, I've not been engaged in the risk assessment process. They just told me and asked me for a risk management plan and risk register before the conference. I provided them with something, but they did that. So I'm assuming that they have already, because we have experienced people from programs. We run monthly meetings. PMI Canadian West Coast chapter runs monthly meetings at the Four Seasons Hotel. So we do have experienced people, and for sure they have thought about it. And then let's see, speaker cancellations. I thought to Carmen, and the first thing that she raised was this. What if something happens on the day off and the speaker is not showing up or they can't? They have some backup speakers. So they have done that. Like even if for that session, for whatever reason, I could not join, there were some backup speakers who have been informed and they're ready to take charge and speak about something else. Maybe not necessarily about the session, but at least to mitigate the risk. So they could just, hold the session and decrease the level of dissatisfaction. And about food and allergy, that was another thing that they identified. And what Carmen told me as a mitigation technique or response for that was that, first of all, they tried to separate the foods that might create allergy from the others, and then they wrote the names so that way people get more awareness so they don't get into any trouble in terms of like getting taking any foods with allergy. But does it mean that it's not possible that mitigation does not remove the whole risk? Which risk technique, which risk response technique would remove the whole risk? Avoid, right? And what does avoid mean? Does it mean that we need to do nothing, just remove that? That's again a myth. I'm talking about myths about a lot at this conference. So when you avoid something, you need to do something else. You avoid something, clear that off, but you need to do something else, right? So some people think that avoiding means just to do nothing, which is not correct. So for some risks, if there is a speaker coming from the US and you know that there are high levels of risks of that person being here, or maybe the cost is too much, you can just avoid that person and bring another speaker. Does it make sense? So it's completely avoiding. But if you're concerned about people not being able to show up, then mitigation would work. And then finally, even for the keynote speakers, they have thought about it and they've identified risks of the keynote speaker not being able to show up, and they have backup plans for that. And then finally, what if we ran out of food, which you didn't mention? That's one of the risks, right? I'm pretty sure that you thought about it, but you tried not to mention that. So there are a couple of things that they have done. First of all, they have added some contingency. So they've accepted that risk, but actively accepted. So it means that they have added a little bit of like contingency, 10% more food, so everyone gets enough food. And they ask the volunteers, our fantastic volunteers, to eat last. So those who have paid and are our guests eat first, and then our volunteers eat last to ensure that all the guests get food. Even if something happens after that, which is called residual risk. So if you implement your risk response and still there is something there, that's called residual risk, which you can deal with that as well. And you need to have fallback plans or backup plans, or let's say plan B for that, is that we could order pizza. So if our guests eat and volunteers do not eat, but again, food is not enough, then we could order pizza, at least either for volunteers. So these are the things that have been taught about by the conference team. And over the course of qualitative and quantitative analysis, they have been able to set some plans and responses. I wish we could go over this expected monetary value thing, which is actually a decision tree, but for the sake of time, we can't go over that. But once we prioritize the risk, we need to identify and calculate what is the dollar value of those risks. We normally go with these options like, this is an example of build or upgrade, build or prototype, buy or build. Each option has their own consequences and probability rankings. Based on those, then you need to calculate what happens, and then you come up with two different numbers for each wing of that decision tree, which we call that expected monetary value of the risk. Then you decide. You definitely go with the one with lower expected monetary value. So that's actually how we do that. So you write down your risk. What are the decisions, that way or this way? If you're going to go that way, there might be some impact. If you go this way, there might be some initial impacts. Like for example, if you want to prototype something before delivering that, definitely if you want to go and prototype, there is some money that you need to put in place to create that prototype. That is the impact. But if you don't want to prototype, there is no money needed for that. You just deliver that. But if you prototype, there are higher chances of getting the customer acceptance. But if you don't prototype, so these are the things that you need to play with. And finally, as a result of probability times impact, you can calculate the score of that, and then by adding those, the expected monetary value of each of these wings of the decision tree would be calculated, and that's where we can say, okay, you know what? For this risk, let's talk about negative risks, I need to escalate that. I can't. As the project manager, I don't have the authority to deal with this risk. I'm going to talk to my sponsor. I'm going to talk to the executive leadership, skilling. Or avoid. We talked about avoid. You just need to avoid it because you can't tolerate that at all. You can't deal with that. You don't have enough funding and time to deal with that. Transfer, insurance is a great example. Mitigate, do something that even if that risk happens, the impact is lower, but do something that you can ensure that the probability of that risk happening is lower, or both. Or both. You're going to be so lucky if you have a plan in place that can, bring down both probability and impact at the same time. And if the risk is positive, as this fantastic team brought up, yeah, of course, there's a positive risk, let's accept that, why not? There's a great opportunity for networking for next year's conference. Do we need to do anything? Like, do we need to enhance that risk or exploit that risk? If yes, let's plan for it. But if something that organically will happen, we just need to accept that risk. Again, because it's all based on each and every project, we just need to leave it to the project team to decide. If this team wanted to manage this conference, they would identify different risks and plan differently compared to the other team. And finally, when you have the plans, you just need to go into the execution phase and implement the risk responses. However, you need to ensure that from time to time, and of course, in a timely manner, weekly, bi-weekly, or whatever, you audit your risks. Remember the watch list? Don't forget about them. They might grow. They might grow, and then they might come into the area that now you need to deal with them. Or some of the identified risks might have gone down, so you just need to add them to your watch list. So this is the whole strategy of risk management. Again, I wish we had more time to go into more details of risk management and practice, but let me know. I will be around here today until the end of the conference. By the way, there is a PMI-RMP course happening. You can add put your business cards here, and you will be participating to a draw for a free course, which is worth $1,500. And thank you so much for listening, and hope you all